Tonight, it is a distinct honor of mine and privilege to introduce our speaker. Some few years ago, in the hallway, a foyer, a vestibule of a church, I crossed the path of Kevin Hern, and he spoke to me for just a few moments, and he said, "Pastor," he said, "we've just got a small window, an opportunity to get this thing turned around for our children and our grandchildren." Kevin Hern has been the quintessential businessman, almost a rags to riches. I think he might frame it in that way, but not exactly, but from modest means to God blessing him to be a very effective businessman with owning multiple franchises, and has taken his hard work and tenacity and persistence, and after building multiple businesses and a network of franchises, at a certain point, Kevin felt in his heart something has got to be done on a national scale. God used him in terms of the corporation on a national leadership level, on a board, and now is using that skill and expertise in Washington, D.C. And I tell you, folks, from the bottom of my heart, I could not be more proud to be represented by anyone as much as I am of Kevin Hern representing the 1st District in Washington, D.C. He has kept his values. There's something about crossing that belt line. Many of you have known it. There's something about crossing that belt line and getting in the Capitol, in the House or the Senate. And sometimes it's like, the country guy going to town is like, my values went out the window. And I sense, it seems to me, that this experience has done nothing but galvanize our congressman in the values that he holds dear to his heart. And Congressman Hern, it's an honor for us to bring you here tonight to speak to us. So come, let's give him a hand.
Jesse, thank you so much. Great to see you, bud. Give this man a hand. I was telling the group earlier that what seems like a long time ago, Jesse, back when this was a dream of yours, I had the privilege, the blessing of coming to one of your first meetings. And I think it all fit like in that table right there. My, look at this. I bet there's 500-600 people in here from all over the state, And we've been across the state sharing news about what's going on in Congress to different groups. And everybody asks you, so what's that city elder thing? So I'm going there Thursday night. I hear you're speaking. So, Jesse, the word's getting out. I just want you to know that. The word's getting out. It's always amazing to me, God, and you all know this, God has a way when you think you're getting pretty big in your britches, He kind of humbles you a little bit, right? And so I've been speaking, and we were just trying to figure out, I've probably been to 30 events since Saturday. And I know something like 12 today or 10, 11, I don't know how many, tons. Then you kind of get in this groove and you're kind of rolling, and then you show up here and I wanted to say preaching to pastors, but boy, I tell you what, that's a dangerous thing to do, right? So I'm just going to share information tonight, okay? Share information, and I'm just honored to be here with you all. I see so many friends, people that I've gotten to know over the last 4 years. And you all know my heart, those who have known me for a while and those who have seen me speak and seen my videos. I kind of just call it like it is. I'm a guy that never ran for office. I spent all my time in business, 35 years in business. And I got acquainted with politics when I moved to Muskogee some 22 years ago, when my wife and I sold our McDonald's in North Little Rock and moved and bought 2 restaurants there. And God planted us right next door to the mother-in-law of Tom Coburn. So if a person was ever going to get indoctrinated in politics, there was never a better person. And he was leaving office, and I got to know him and worked on the campaign of the person, Andy Ewing from Wagner, and we lost. We got humbled. My first political campaign got beat. And then 4 years later, when Tom decided, got coerced, got convinced, got pushed and shoved to get into the race in March when the primary was in June, and he'd been out of the office for 4 years to run for United States Senate across this entire state. And he landed, and I was the first person to pick him up and drive him across northeastern Oklahoma. And his wife, Carolyn, said, Tommy, that's what she always called him, Tommy, I do not want you flying anywhere. You have to drive. He made his first trip around the state with then a young staffer named Greg Treat, who's now the Senate Pro Tem. And he came back to me, and Tom said to me, he says, Kevin, don't tell Carolyn you're going to fly me all over the state. And so he and I'm a private pilot, and I flew him everywhere. Just him and I in the front seat. We'd land in Perry and Woodward, and Enid, and Altus, and Lawton, and Oklahoma City, and everywhere. And there's never been a better teacher for the craziness of Washington, D.C. before you get there than that man. That was in 2004. We were sitting at a restaurant, a Mexican restaurant, toward the end of the campaign, and he asked me a question. I never will forget it. I know right where we were sitting. He said, what are you going to be doing in 10 years? I said, I'm going to be working like my full head off because that's what all I know to do. I said, why do you ask? He said, you should consider running for politics. 10 years later down the road. Do you know 10 years, 2 months later, his cancer came back and he resigned from Congress. I started kind of piquing my interest. He kind of was telling me things, and 3 years later, in 2017, I announced my run for Congress. I say all that to say this. You have to stay grounded where you came from. I always tell people you can never forget who brought you to the dance. And there's a lot of people in Washington, D.C. who think they get elected by people in Washington, D.C. That's why we have the problems we have. I want to tell you a quick story, and then I want to get into some things that are going on. And then Jesse told me I had to get this done in under 2 hours. So I'm going to work on this. I'm really going to cut a lot out, Jesse, okay? I'm going to speed up and all that kind of stuff. Many of you all remember or know about, and you studied about a guy named Saul Alinsky, somebody who really hated our way of life. And he wrote a book called Rules for Radicals. And, in that he laid out a radical plan for social change. And if you remember, in 1969, then Hillary Rodham used that book for the basis of her doctoral thesis. That's how much that woman disliked America, that she used that. And also, by the way, President Obama used that book as well. So Peggy Noonan said in 2005, she called it the Rosetta Stone for trying to understand how to change the American political culture. And you all know about what they said about taking over the education, taking over the health care. You know all these stories, erasing history. Everything that the Democrats have continued to do, I would say long before he even wrote this book. I think this was just kind of memorializing what had been going on since the turn of the century. He put it in book form, and then people wrote about it and ran for president, became first ladies. And when she became the first lady, by the way, the White House shut down that thesis, told them they could not release that thesis because they knew that it would taint a bad light on the White House. And you guys might say, why is a guy like me, as a conservative, talking about a president and somebody ran against Donald Trump and lost? But I believe you have to understand all this chaos that we're experiencing as Americans. You need to know where it comes from. And you got to understand what the objectives were and what the objectives are of those currently in power. See, some think that Joe Biden is really in power. Joe Biden is not in power. We now know that. We thought this was going to happen. But I bet if I could have gotten all of you all to write down in an envelope back in November what his presidency would look like, you would have predicted, but there's nothing, nobody could have predicted about how bad it is. The man is incompetent. The man needs to resign, as I said this past week. One of the key principles of Alinsky's book was he said, power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have. Think about that for a second. He said the power is not only what you have, but what the enemy thinks you have. And I'm going to talk about all these different things that you all are seeking. I'll try to bring some sense to them or some clarity to what the problems and the crisis that we have right now. Many have been created, if not all, by this president since January 20th. They've been self-inflicted. We've never seen this of any president, any administration, certainly in our history, that's been recorded. So if you look at, and we can just start this, you look at under the current administration, we know what's going on in Afghanistan. And friends, we've pulled our troops out, but the war's not over. The battle's not over. The battle's never over until you get your people out. No commander-in-chief. The creed of our military, the creed of those who protect us has been, is today, and will always be, you never leave anybody behind. How many people in here serve in the military? Look at that. Look at that. Thank you. Thank you. I see people out there that have dark hair, gray hair, and hair that's turned loose. And I don't care what generation you served under, you always know the creed. You don't leave your buddies behind. And I don't care how many times this president cries about Beau Biden. It is a sad, tragic thing, and his son did serve. But I assure you, Joe Biden is no commander-in-chief. You do not leave your soldiers on the battlefield. And this has been ran by Joe Biden and the Secretary of State and a retired four-star general who should be ashamed of himself. He should resign for the lack of his boss not listening to him. I can tell you, having been in a classified briefing just a week ago Monday, that the Joint Chief of Staff, in his own words, is appalled by what's gone on. He was appalled then. This was 3 days before the bombing that killed our soldiers. And I can only imagine that he is saddened today of having a boss, two bosses, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and the President of the United States, completely disregard what he, a person that's been in the military 40 years, a foot soldier, knows. I can't imagine how many people, when this dust settles, will still be remaining in this upper leadership. It's really a sad excuse for leadership. You know, when you're looking at what's going on at home, Joe Biden has a war. It's called a war on prosperity. If you've succeeded in anything, he wants to tear you down. He wants to tear you down. He has made this point time and time again. So has Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. If you achieved anything, they want to take that from you, have you send it to Washington, D.C., and they'll let the really smart people inside the Beltway tell you where it should go. And by the way, in case you're ever wondering, how many of you have been to Washington, D.C.? A lot of you. If you don't think the smartest people aren't in Washington, D.C., you should just ask somebody up there. They get really smart when they land. It's the most amazing. It must be in the air. I don't know what it is, but it's really kind of crazy. But you think about what's going on right now. People who create jobs are evil people. They're evil people. Every day they try to trample on our most fundamental rights, the right to protect ourselves under the Second Amendment, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, the right to worship and exercise our deeply held beliefs under the First Amendment, who they've argued for since the days of Berkeley that was, the most sanctimonious or sacrosanct thing we should have. And yet they're holding back, pushing us back, saying we can't express our First Amendment rights. And now how we look at our relationship between our doctor and our patient and trying to overtake a single-payer system of healthcare in America. And that's why healthcare costs have gone through the roof. 10 years ago, when Obama overtook the healthcare industry and said, we've got 30 million of people that are uninsured, we're going to fix that. Well, guess what? Today, we still have 30 million people uninsured, and we've destroyed our healthcare system. We have doctors who don't want to be doctors. We have hospitals who are struggling. We have everybody except, quite honestly, pharmaceutical companies who are not doing well, and the whole place is blowing up. And because of all my time that I've spent in fighting for business owners, not only in our state and in my own business and across this country, back in, I guess it was April, Kevin McCarthy asked me if I would chair the task force for the Healthy Futures Task Force, which is going to be the Republican response to Obamacare, to chair the subcommittee on affordability. So I can tell you, I'm going to be some people's worst nightmare. We're going to expose them. You know, every area of our life right now is under attack. Every area. You think about this. Biden has created an energy crisis. The first thing he did by a stroke of a pen, closing down Keystone, closing down permitting, sending our jobs overseas, shutting in wells. Think about what he did at the southern border. He went and tried to undo everything at the southern border, and we had over 1 million people that's crossed the southern border since he's been president. And quite frankly, if you look at the TV cameras, there's not 1 million people sitting around there. They've been released into the United States with a court date that they'll never come to. The Supreme Court is finally kind of getting its act together on a couple of issues, and they just told the Biden administration, who predicted this, by the way, that the eviction moratorium wouldn't stay and to remain in Mexico, which means now when they seek asylum, they have to go back in Mexico and wait in the 110-degree desert. And these aren't Mexicans. Contrary to popular belief, these are people who have walked 1,200 miles from Central America, and many of those have been brought from the Middle East, from Yemen, terrorist countries, trying to figure out how to get in here. And you think about what President Biden has done in Afghanistan. He's unleashed all these terrorist networks, and they know the pathway. They see it on American TV. You just walk across the southern border. It's not a problem. In fact, if you look at this, he's also created an inflation crisis with dumping trillions of dollars of your taxpayer dollars and your future kids and grandkids and their kids having to pay back a debt that's insane. When I came into Congress in January of 2019, my first time to get sworn in the full Congress, the national debt was $19 trillion. Today, it's 28.5 on paper. It's really over 30 trillion. They just are holding back the monies that were allocated by Biden in February, and plus the deficit, and they're holding back and making sure that that doesn't get released until they increase the debt ceiling. It will pass. The Democrats will pass it because I've got 106 Republicans said they won't sign it. And by this time next year, toward the end of next year, it's going to be over $40 trillion. $40 trillion. If you want a perspective on that, it gets so big you can't understand it. If you counted to 1 trillion, you counted 1, 2 every second, to count to 1 trillion would take you 32,000 years. To count to 1 trillion, think of 40 times that. That's how big this number is, and it's going to continue to grow. In fact, a tragic thing happened today. This is how deep they're getting into our life. Very tragic. The Biden administration announced they're going to start investigating the McFlurry machines at McDonald's. I'm telling you, it's the truth. It's reported out today. They have way too much money on their hands and way too much time. It's a sad day when the federal government's investigating the ice cream machines at McDonald's. Not saying at times there doesn't need to be, but I'm just saying this is how crazy it's gotten. You know, it's an honor to go to work for you every day in Washington, D.C., and remind myself every single day that I'm doing it under the guise of the United States Constitution. And it's amazing to me that this little document, it's not very big at all. 7 articles, 27 amendments. It's very easy to read, very self-explanatory. And when you read the time, place, and manner of all elections is to be determined by the state legislature, that's in Article 1 and Article 2, and you object because they weren't, then somehow you're called a traitor, treason, all these things that go with it. I guess you wear that with a badge of honor because you actually read the United States Constitution. So, I've said it proudly, and I'll say it a jillion times over. There was nothing wrong with objecting. Those were not done properly, and until we get investigation in those states and we see what happens and we get those corrected, we're going to have problems time and time again. Florida had a problem in 2000. They fixed that problem. We're not against mail-in ballots. We just want to make sure it's you that actually mailed in the ballot. And I don't know why the Democrats can't understand that I guarantee you there's not a person in here that want 100% of America to vote. We just want to make sure that you're actually the person that cast that vote. I mean, that's as simple as it gets. We're not against voting. We want more people to vote. So as we go through this whole process tonight, I just want to say to you, all these obstacles in front of us, and I just want to remind us when we get down the dumps, and it's easy for us to get down the dumps. It's easy for me to get down the dumps. But I just want you to know, we the people still hold the power. We really do. As much as the Democrats want to concentrate the power in Washington, D.C., which is the big struggle we're going through right now. We've never seen, we know if you study any history whatsoever, and you haven't been erased yet, you know that our biggest issue and why we had to change the Articles of Confederation to go to the United States Constitution was because this whole idea who was going to have the power. Was it going to be Washington, D.C., or was it going to be the states? And we fought this battle time and time again. We fought civil wars over it, lost 600,000 of our own people. We're going to continue to fight because we're in an experiment that's never been done before on this planet. This idea of a representative republic. And we're going to fight it tooth and nail. And it's what Franklin said, we're going to give you a republic if you can keep it. And we're in a struggle right now of concentration of power in Washington, D.C. like we have never seen. Never seen. This is a culmination of over 100 years of progressive ideas. And the timing is right. I would tell you that spiritually there's a challenge. I don't know if you saw the fight in the White House today at the press conference when a reporter called out Joe Biden for his hypocrisy on abortion. And Jen Psaki said, "Oh, that's fine for you to say. You'll never be pregnant because you're a man." Now think about that for a second. Or just 3 weeks ago when the Appropriations Chair, Rosa DeLauro, when they introduced the bills in the House that removed the Hyde Amendment, which was an agreement by Republicans and Democrats back in the 80s, that said we would never federally fund abortions, and we've put that in every bill since then. The Democrats in this Congress stripped it out in the House. In the House. And Rosa DeLauro, in charge of all appropriations, stood up there and said, you can go look this up. She said, Democrats have made a mistake for 45 years in allowing that to be in there. 45 years they've allowed that to be in there. And they said that is a mistake. We have the current power. We have to get involved to change this downward trajectory. We have to empower our freedom and our entrepreneurship, and power to return our government to its constitutional role. But I will tell you, and you see the passion and the leadership of this group, at the end of the day, there's always going to be hope because we have faith in something greater. Something greater. And it's not about politics. It's not about culture. It's not about fads. And I can tell you, I have hope. I have hope. It's not a physical man. It's not an institution. It's not even this body. And I know you all know that as well. It's a hope in a ruler of our world, knowing that I have Jesus Christ in me, and that when times are tough, that he's the ruler of all. And I just say to you all, can you only imagine? No, I'm not going to sing. You thought I was going to break into a song, didn't you, Jesse? It's going to get scary there for a minute, brother. But can you only imagine those poor souls who don't have Jesus Christ? It's hopeless for them. And we have to work together to help them. Because as we know, Jesus loved going into the non-believers, didn't he? That's where you find a flock to build. So I want to talk to you about some of the things that the Democrats are doing. And you've seen some of this stuff on the news, but I kind of want to walk you through it because one of the things, I know we have business owners in here, and I've said this to so many business owners this week. One of the things that business people know, but you'd love to do, which is different than politics, I can tell you and attest to this. In politics, you can fix a little deal, you put a cap on it, and you sit it on the shelf saying, that's been done. And you do that time and time again. You say, oh, well, what about, this is, well, we did that bill and it's fixed. In business, when you make a decision, it affects other people and other things. And what we see with Joe Biden is he's now a leader, an executive of us in the United States government. And you see that whenever he shuts down pipelines and he shuts down our production in the United States, we have to become dependent upon the Middle East again. And then he goes and tries to strong arm them and says, we got to turn on the oil because our gas prices are going too fast. We're thinking, duh, that's what happened with your old boss when you were in office for 8 years. Did you not learn anything there? Where have you been? And it's like right now, what you see, what he's done in Afghanistan by not getting our Americans out. What he's done is created a terrorist network, and he's left our southern border wide open, but he didn't think to close the southern border, put the things back in place that President Trump had so that we didn't have to worry about terrorists coming across the southern border and harming us and creating other 9/11s. Not a very, very smart guy. And then denying and saying it's a success. You've heard it. You've heard it. And anytime he gets asked the tough questions, he says he's instructed to only take questions from certain people. And then if he does it a different way, he will get in trouble. This is not kindergarten, friends. He is, to think about this, by the very nature of his title, he's considered the leader of the free world. Now, think about that if you're Putin or Xi Jinping or, just the list goes on. Or, Ghani. We're talking about, Afghanistan President Ghani going to another country. At least he came back and talked with some intelligence about what's going on. I'm not sure Biden has said anything that's been intelligent so far. But, think about what he just said. I think he forgets, or somebody forgets to remind him what he said with George Stephanopoulos just 2 weeks ago. He said he wouldn't leave anyone behind. We actually put a bill on the floor. Mike Gallagher, who's a Marine Corps intelligence officer, put a bill on the floor before we came back, which was 2 weeks ago, to simply have the military, or State Department rather, report to us in Congress, all in Congress, how many Americans were still left in Afghanistan. And Nancy Pelosi would not put it on the floor for a vote. It would have passed. Democrats would have supported. That's why she didn't put it on the floor. For us to even know who were there, because what we're hearing, what they weren't counting on, is social media and these people screaming out to CNN reporters and others that there's a problem. And when we talk about the fall of Saigon, this is actually worse. For all you Vietnam vets out there, my dad was a Vietnam vet. What you saw happen in 2 years after the war was over, or our military was out, and this when we had the fall of Saigon. This happened in this president's watch, and he had all the intel to do it. And this nonsense that he said this blamed it on President Trump, he had undone every policy that President Trump had done to that point. He had the ability. He had the ability to get out of that. And, even when you look at his statement, he's being criticized by both Democrats and Republicans, and even CNN and MSNBC. He's being criticized by Clinton's cabinet and Obama's cabinet. Leon Panetta, who served as CIA director and also as defense secretary, has been one of the biggest critics. He was on CNN. If you ever want to see a really funny interview that happened last week, watch that interview because he was so critical. I don't think the reporter on CNN, it's been really kind of fun watching CNN the last week. I didn't know they could actually report news. And so it's been really good to watch them actually report the news. But I will say this, and I know you all know this. We do need to say prayers every night. It is a tragedy that we left our American families there, little kids, parents, our Afghan allies, people that kept our soldiers alive, people who actually rescued our then senators and Chuck, and Joe Biden and Chuck Hagel. That he's turned their back on them and just left them there. And we need to say prayers for our former special operators who are doing business in Afghanistan, getting these folks out every day. And we need to say prayers for people here in our district and our state that have reached out to us, and we're working through the State Department and through Leader McCarthy's office and even the Speaker's office to get these folks out. And I'll leave it at that because we don't want these people exposed. But there's a lot of work going on right now behind the scenes to get these folks out. And it's sad we have to do it this way when we had 2,500 American soldiers and 7,500 NATO soldiers holding that entire country. And we pulled them out and left our allies hanging. If you saw those stories back in July, our allies woke up one morning and our troops were gone. That was by order of the President of the United States of America. And you saw what happened in Great Britain, the House of Commons, censoring the President of the United States of America, our strongest ally. You saw what the Chinese did to the Taiwanese, sent them and ridiculed them. Will the American people help you when we come attack you and take you back? You saw what the new prime minister from Israel did. Bennett comes to the United States seeking to understand if Joe Biden and the United States would support them when the times got tough. So we know that it's a tough time right now. We need to say prayers, and we need to get our folks home. One of the things I've been asked about this, and I just want to leave this with you before we move on to a couple of the topics here, but is exactly what have we left? We have left the Taliban with the fourth strongest military in the world, behind the United States, China, and Russia, and then the Taliban. And they're equipped with $85 billion of American equipment, 75,000 vehicles, 200 airplanes and helicopters, 600,000 small arms and rifles, and they have more Black Hawk helicopters than 85% of the militaries in the world. So this is a no kidding. This is serious, and we've just equipped a group of folks that are on the terrorist watch list. So you tell me that this president thinks this is a success, and I still don't see how he thinks this is going to happen. So as we go forward here, I want to talk about a few more things before we let you go tonight. And that I'm on like 10 minutes in right now, so we got about an hour and 50 minutes or so. There's so much material with this guy, so much material. I do want to tell you though, no kidding. I was looking up. I thought, I got all these pastors here. I was trying to find a political / politician, a politician / pastor joke as an opening joke. You see these guys do that. Man, y'all should read some of those. Those are really bad. I mean, really bad. I got to ask Jesse to give me a clean one. I don't know. Pastors talk like that. So we're going back Wednesday actually, to talk about all these great tax hikes, because clearly you all making too much money. You need to send some more to Washington, D.C. so we can spend it. So just phone in $3.5 trillion. That'd be great. No, all seriousness aside, this is insane. We are going to spend this year, if Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats have their way, somewhere around $14 trillion in this 1 year. 1 year. When just 2.5 years ago, the national debt was $19 trillion. And I had a congressman tell me that the Democrats said they're considering this like hogs eating a slop at a trough. They said they have waited 10 years for all this spending because they missed the last 6 years of Obama because they lost the House. And they thought they were going to win with Hillary Clinton, and they lost. So they lost that 4 years. So they're going to eat all they can eat right now while they can. So it's our job in Congress to make their life miserable. Yeah. So we've got like a gazillion amendments. I was on a call today. I've got meetings, like I said, flying up Wednesday. We've got 2 days of 12.5-hour meetings in person in D.C. Then we have 2 more next week. And this is to go after what they're trying to do with health care, trying to make Medicare for all, which will be Medicare for none. It's about basically cradle to grave, free college, Green New Deal, kill our fossil fuel industry. It's all this is in there. And so you're hearing, just so you know, you're hearing today, Joe Manchin, we're going to have to recruit that guy to be a Republican before it's over. He's the only Democrat left in West Virginia. I think he's a Republican. He doesn't even know it. But he is a good dude. I mean, he's a guy that if you look him up and look up Tom Coburn, you'll see Tom Coburn supported him in 2014, wrote him checks. This is how fine. This is how much this guy loves America. And he said, I will not support it. We need to take a hiatus. We need to take a pause. And that's going to send a message. I'm actually going to use his words in my opening comments in the hearing on Thursday. I'm going to use the Democrats' Senate. I'm going to use his and Kirsten's sentiment because I know she can't stand it. He's already said something, so she's going to be right behind him. Now, I'm going to use their words for the opening statement to Nancy Pelosi and the head of the Ways and Means Committee. So if you look at what's going on here, the Democrats have all the votes. You know, if you read the Constitution and the way it's set up, I mean, by rule, we don't have to vote a single vote on the debt ceiling. And as many of you know, some of you know, I was asked back in December to be the budget chairman, and I worked on the budget. It's the only budget's been done since I came to Congress in 3 years, and the Democrats have been in control. So I worked on the budget for the only budget created in the United States government. I was the chairman of that committee from December of 2020 until we produced it in May. It's incredible, the layers and layers of spending we have, duplicative spending. When people say, the Democrats namely, and the crazy news stations say the Republicans don't care about those who need a hand up, it's just not true. We have 92 programs in the United States of America giving out $1 trillion a year to those who need help. That's the federal government. That doesn't even include what you all do in your churches, what you all do as individuals, what all of our charity organizations do, but we're giving $1 trillion a year. And prior to Biden, our budgets were about $4.5 trillion, so almost 25% of all taxpayer dollars taken in was given out to help those who couldn't help themselves, who needed to help up. Where we failed miserably in these programs is we haven't helped people to get off of those programs and into jobs. And if you read about my background, you'll know why it's such a passion for me. And I serve on that subcommittee on Ways and Means called Worker and Family Support. And I intend to do two things. First of all, make it easier so when a single mom or whomever needs help walks into a facility, they don't have to run across town or across the county to 10 different locations to apply for the help they need. They walk in, they get help, and they leave, and they figure out a pathway. They can either talk to a counselor, figure out a pathway to get to a job. Because I'm a believer of what Ronald Reagan said, and I know this for a fact. The best social program in the world is a job. Here's what I will tell you this. And if you don't remember anything, tell this to your kids or grandkids, and those people are not working. Because we're all guilty of this. I don't care what generation you came from. You always wanted to come in and be the president of something, right, with no experience. But you have to get a job before you can get a better job, before you can get a career. Nobody's ever started out in a career. And nobody started out in a better job until you had a job. So you got to get people working. We saw a glimpse of what this country can look like right before COVID. We had Americans working, we had wages rising like we'd never seen before, we had an economy booming, we had every diversity group, ethnicity group employed to the hilt. We saw our participation rates of our workers going back and working like we'd never seen before. We were starting to close our gap and our deficit, and then along came COVID. So we've seen it. We know that this thing called this American experiment of capitalism still works. And we can't let it get away from us. I'm going to touch on a few more things. I don't even know what time. Is this getting 10 o'clock yet? I'm down to 5 pages left. They're big words, though. Big words, yeah. So I was just telling some of my team, I had we all know we love the Second Amendment. We have a great state, great fighters, Oklahoma 2A. We have NRA. We have everybody. You know, we have a great state. I had the most cool experience. Have any of you ever heard of Heller versus DC? The only Second Amendment that's ever been tried in front of the Supreme Court, 2008. Anybody heard that? No. Man, I know you've heard of that. I had a chance to sit in a meeting with this guy. He's from Arkansas. And Dick Heller told a story. And he actually walked us backwards how the Second Amendment is biblical. Now, it's a pretty cool story. I would love to get him here somehow to tell this story. But this guy is incredible, and he's the most unassuming person. He's a person who took on the District of Columbia about the constitutional right to keep and bear arms, and won. He won. So you should read that story about him and about how important it is, because that precedent has been used time and time again for a lot of states to do what they do with Second Amendment. I mentioned about pro-life. So there, and Jesse and I have talked about this many times in the leadership. There will never be a more pro-life president in the history of our country, we believe, I think we still believe, than Donald J. Trump. Ever. Ever. We all know that Jesus uses the least of us to do some incredible things. We've seen this, right? We know about Saul, and we know how that all worked out with old Paul, and we know a guy named Donald J. Trump who people thought was a scoundrel, rascal. I tell you what, I know Democrats wishes he was the president of the United States right now. Yeah, there was never any question if you messed with us, what would happen in return. He didn't have to have handlers. He didn't have to have somebody pick and choose who he was going to call on. He didn't care what your question was. He had an answer. You might not like it. It didn't matter. But I guarantee you that the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist People, Xi Jinping, feared Donald J. Trump. I guarantee the little man with the reactors in North Korea feared Donald J. Trump. He didn't start those back up until Trump left. I guarantee the people in Iran, they weren't making anything after he yanked the money back out of there. And you didn't hear Putin, wearing his shirt and come riding on a white pony into the United States of America. So foreign policy is huge today. It's going to be huge. And we've never seen something so bad as we're seeing right now today. And we've got such a lack of leadership right now on our maintaining our stature around the world. We've got a lot of work to do. I think we all have to be excited. I don't want to get off of this issue. I'm going to touch a couple things before I get off of pro-life. But you all see what's going on with Roe v. Wade right now. Yeah, it's we're going to throw a little favor toward Texas and what they just passed. We could argue they let it get out of their state in 73 anyway, right? So that, but Nancy Pelosi is going to have us, I heard today she's going to put a vote on the floor on Roe v. Wade to try to make it law and see what the Senate Democrats do. So it's going to be very interesting. This fight is really getting ready to take off. She knows right now the Supreme Court is a problem. If you look at my whining colleague, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, today, she now is talking about packing the court because they're losing some battles. If they don't get their way, they cry and want to break the law. And so they'll stop at no means to destroy this country. No means. When you have people that will actually stop you and have you correct what you call them, you're not a Democrat, you're a socialist Democrat, you're a Bernie Sanders socialist Democrat. They are proud to follow Bernie Sanders and his socialist ways. We just think about this. The Democrat Party, 2 cycles ago, Bernie Sanders was an outcast. He was a knucklehead. He was somebody that nobody listened to. And now he is the driving force by the budgets, the Bernie Sanders budget, the policies that Joe Biden is doing are Bernie Sanders policies. He is now Main Street Democrats. This is where the Democrat Party is in Washington, D.C. I will tell you, I've talked to some Democrats around here. They know that. I've talked to state legislatures, state senators that are Democrats in our state. And they said, can you tell us what's wrong with our Democrats in Washington, D.C.? And Senator, you know them. You know who the people are. They know they are embarrassed. Now, they've got remnants in our state right now that are out here trying to run in some of our federal offices, hoping that they can raise some money and win some of our federal offices, both in Oklahoma City and here. But we're going to do everything with your help and you getting out the word that we're running, and we're going to be pushing hard to preserve our country's way of life and what we know is right. And we're not going to allow Democrats to get in here and change what we're doing. And I can tell you right now, as long as I'm able and as long as I can, I'm not going to do anything but work hard for you guys every day to make sure that we don't let this country become a communist country. Because when you look at what's going on right now, I appreciate that, but let me just tell you what this, let me get off this just in a second, but if you look at the way, the steps to communism, socialism is that interim step. And I'm telling you, we have got to fight, because once it gets there, Tom Coburn taught me one thing one time. He said, when half the American people adopt something, you never get rid of it. I wasn't sure if that was just trying to scare me, but I will tell you, when I did the budget earlier this year, I saw decades of bills and legislation that had been left in there because nobody had the intestinal fortitude to set it back, because they knew that there was a constituent with every piece of legislation in there. So if we don't stop socialism in its tracks right now, today, and once it gets a foothold and more people are dependent on Washington, D.C., we're going to have a civil war. We're going to have to get it back. And so let's don't let it go there. Let's all get engaged. Let's keep our voices loud and proud. I want to say something here. So my friend Tom Coburn was a great philosopher, and he always wrote, if you never read any of his books, you should read them. But he wrote this, and I'm going to end. He wrote about a French diplomat in 1800, Alex de Tocqueville. And de Tocqueville was a French diplomat that came to the United States, and he said, iron sharpens iron. And he said this. He said, iron sharpens iron, quality that made the rugged independence found at the nucleus of the American experiment so beautiful. And he said this about the average American. Remember, this is in the 1800s. Everything about him is primitive and unformed, but he himself, the result of the labor and experience of 18 centuries. He wears the dress and he speaks the language of cities. He is acquainted with the past, curious of the future, and ready for argument upon the present. He is, in short, a highly civilized being who consents for a time to inhabit the backwoods and who penetrates into the wilds of the New World with the Bible, an axe, and a file of newspapers. One of the things I was asked last year, been asked a lot, but okay, you've been in Congress one term now. What do you think needs to be done to change the direction of this country, starting with Congress? And you all saw this. In January, we put out a roadmap to reform Congress. Got a lot of press off of this. I'm a firm believer in this. Had a lot of calls from different people. Quite honestly, on this first one, on term limits, it calls from Democrats, believe in the same thing. So there's actually 7 items. Term limits, no budget, no pay until Congress gets a budget and the appropriation process done, so we stop this crazy at midnight wasting your taxpayer dollars. So no pay and no recess, so that's 2 and 3. So you don't get to go home to get your job done, your basic job. Number 4 is to stop this crazy people getting in Congress, lobbying an industry they want to work in, getting some bills done, making favors, and then leaving their office, becoming a consultant, and then on the 1-year anniversary day, becoming a lobbyist. We changed that to 10 years. That will change the behavior of who goes to Congress. Number 5 is you got to read the bills before you vote on them. I will tell you this, my first experience with this, and it's funny who you get call you and criticize you, But the first CARES bill last year, on March, it was on a Friday night, and we'd waited all day. They'd been at the White House negotiating with President Trump and everybody, but they wouldn't tell us what it was. And Pelosi was arguing and all this stuff, but she wouldn't give out the text. And I get a call. I'm actually walked back to my apartment. It's 11:40 at night on Friday night, and I get a call. We're going to vote. I said, "Have you seen the bill text?" "No." I said, "Okay." So I'm walking. Some of you have been through the tunnels. I'm walking from Cannon to the Capitol. It's 11:56. I look at my phone. I get the text. They're ringing for the vote at 11:56, and we just got the text. I walk on the floor of the House. I ask one of the leaders of the Republican Party, "How much is this going to cost?" "We're not sure." And I said, "You've been working on this for 2 days. I mean, you're part of this deal." And I said, Where is Kevin Brady and Steve Scalise?" "Well, they're over there." I said, "I'm going to tell them I'm not voting for it. I didn't read it. I didn't see it. I got it 6 minutes ago. It's 230 pages long. It turned out to be almost $200 billion. I didn't vote for it. When I didn't vote for it, I sat there. I was so frustrated because I knew the American people were hurting. But the point being with this is that we got it. At 2:12 or 2:20, the vote closed. Right before it closed, I was one of the first 6 that didn't vote for it. By the time it closed, there had been 34 others that changed their vote to vote no. It was 40 of us that voted no. They voted no because we didn't get a chance to see what we were going to be mortgaging our future for. And then finally, number six, and you know my status on this. I was the only member of the delegation, I believe, that voted to eliminate earmarks. We got to eliminate them. I don't care how they're done. They're used after the fact in the appropriations process to garner votes. And that's not what American people want. They want you to vote on the merits of the bill based on what they're worth. And then finally, and this is the one that's the most amazing thing to me personally, because it troubles me because one of my campaign promises is to not be a part of the federal pension program. You have no box on there to opt out of it. And I've gone and I thought that was a mistake. And I went over and asked them, and they said, no, because we need everybody contributing to it. Because we have all the big pensions from the previous pension program we got to fund. Because those people had the big pension programs. And we got to fund those, so we need everybody today paying in. So those are the 7 things. So in my 62-minute closing here, in all seriousness, I appreciate your patience. As you know, and you see this on TV, there's just a lot going on. A lot going on. It's so great to be with you tonight. And so here's what I want to say. I want to start reminding you where I began, which I know that seemed like 2 or 3 hours ago. But it's important to never forget where our true power comes from. Despite all that I have just discussed, our hope is found in our author and a finisher of our faith, the same Creator who through divine providence inspired this great nation and the very idea that is America. That is why that what you're doing here is important. And also want to say that the hope that believers have lives in us. And it's our responsibility, all of us, to share our light with dark and often hopeless world. The solution to every problem that we have today as a nation and will face in the future cannot be solved in Washington, D.C., contrary to what most Democrats and some Republicans believe. It can only be found through a Savior who lives in you and me. So I want to charge you with something tonight. And to Jesse, who I consider to be a dear friend. He and I have talked at the weirdest times of the days and nights, and I appreciate your friendship, my friend, and your brotherhood. Thank you. And the entire team at the city elders, and the team has gotten bigger. Dave, thank you for all you've done. Appreciate you. Keep pressing on. I know you don't need to hear that, but sometimes affirmation is good. To know that you need a hug, a pat on the back, great job. When things don't go like they're supposed to, you just keep pressing on. But it's only through prayer and your dedication, your activism, and your love for those who have not yet come to know our hope, that we can see our nation return to its biblical foundation, the very basis of what this entire program is. And the final sentence is, I want you all to know and rest assured that I won't stop working. It won't bother me to call out a Republican equally with a Democrat for not upholding our constitutional values. I've done it on the floor of the House. I will continue to do it. It's not because I'm trying to be ornery, but I think we go there with a duty to return this country to what we know and the power of the people. Thank you so much. God bless you. Have a great evening. Thank you.